Dragon Quest VII. Dun dun dun. It was released 25 years ago this past week, and honestly, guys, that seems virtually impossible to me. So I thought I would do a little video just talking about my memories with Dragon Quest VII, or what you're seeing here, Dragon Warrior 7. This video really isn't gonna, it's not gonna be structured. It's gonna be as long as it's gonna be. It's really just me talking a little bit about this game now that it's hit a quarter of a century. I can't believe it. To me, when I think about 20 years ago, I think about like the Super Nintendo and things like that. But to think that PlayStation 1 was 25 years ago, it just seems impossible. Like absolutely impossible to me. So, thinking back to Dragon Quest VII, and I'm going to refer to it as Dragon Quest VII. I know that here in North America it was called Dragon Warrior 7, but whatever. You got to remember that we only had the first 4 games on the NES, and that was pretty much it. You know, like we would get the Dragon Warrior 1 and 2 and Dragon Warrior 3 on the Game Boy, Game Boy Color, whatever. We would also get the first 2 Dragon Quest Monsters games, but realistically, you know, we had missed out on so many awesome games. Like the fact that we missed Dragon Quest V and 6 and the remakes of 1 and 2 and 3 on the Super Famicom or Super Nintendo, whatever, that really left sort of like a bad taste in North Americans' mouths, because unlike Final Fantasy that, you know, kept chugging along, Enix basically bounced in North America after the abysmal sales of Dragon Warrior 4. And that pretty much, you know, was like the nail in the coffin for the series. Like I always talk about it as like the first dark age of Dragon Quest, because realistically it was like there was just no games coming out, and missing out on the Super Nintendo generation was such a big deal, because that generation was the generation that kind of allowed Square anyway to kind of make some inroads with Final Fantasy. And of course, you know, we missed all kinds of Final Fantasies as well, but we were none the wiser, right? We had Final Fantasy, Final Fantasy II, Final Fantasy III that were released. We had no idea that it was actually Final Fantasy IV and Final Fantasy VI. Like we had no clue that that was actually what was happening, unless you were really like hardcore into the Japanese video game scene, magazines and things like that. But like missing that era was such a huge deal for Enix, because we just, I don't know, like they just didn't make any inroads. So it was like the series was given away as part of Nintendo Power. I'm not going to get into that whole story, but like we went from that gave it basically the greatest amount of exposure at the time, to it just selling like less and less and less and less and less. And then Enix bounces, and then they make their triumphant return, and Dragon Warrior 7, as it was called here, really landed with like a thud. And there's a lot of reasons for this, most of which is what I just said. But the next one is that at the time, this was one of the longest role-playing games ever. And there was just so much dialogue, so much text in the game, that it took Enix of America so long, like literally, I think it was like a year and a half before it was released in North America. And by this point, the PlayStation 2 was out, and it didn't look amazing. Like if you go back in time and you think about when Final Fantasy VII hit the scene, right? Sure, Final Fantasy VII's polygon graphics there, like if you look at Cloud and Tifa and all of them, they're very primitive, right? Like it's very, very basic. They're blocky, all that sort of stuff. but the cinematics blew our friggin' minds back then. Like, seriously, they just blew our minds. And now you've got Dragon Quest VII coming over, and it just didn't look the part. You know, it was using sprites for its characters and its enemies. It had 3D, sort of like Grandia, where you could like move the camera around, but it just didn't look great. And the battle system and stuff, while classic Dragon Quest, it just looked so plain. It's like if you go back and you play Dragon Quest VIII, the OG Japanese one, and then you play the North American one, you start to appreciate what was done. Like where the menus were just more colorful, they had more shapes to them and things like that, whereas the Japanese version was just hardcore basic. And it just didn't resonate at all with North Americans, and it led to the second dark age of Dragon Quest, basically, until Dragon Quest VIII came over and was actually called Dragon Quest VIII, and then finally the series started to have like a resurgence. We had all the DS games and so on and so forth. And there was another period where that we went dark for a bit, but whatever. The purpose of today is actually to talk about Dragon Quest VII, and now that you have like all that history, you can see what I'm talking about in the video. Now you'll also notice in the video that it's really early in the game, what you're seeing, and that's because you only fight your first slime about, I don't know, an hour and a half, an hour and 45 minutes into the beginning of the game. That's a long time to go before you actually start fighting anything, and like before the game really, you know, starts. And so I don't know. I think this one is a weird one for a lot of North Americans. I keep saying North Americans, it's only because of that period, right? But I think worldwide, like this is one of those games where, like, if you're not into Dragon Quest, this one can be a little bit difficult to get into because it's just so massive. And the reason it's massive is because the game has you basically going back through dungeons that you've already done multiple times. So like you go through an area in one sort of like period, and then you'll come back and do it again. And it's stuff like that I think it just didn't sit well with too many folks outside of Japan at the time. So that's sort of like the historical context and all of that for your general, say, player, if you will. But I am not your general player. So for me, I have a very different type of story. Like, very, very different type of story. Because for me, I love this series, as you guys know. I mean, we've been playing Dragon Quest X here on the channel for, my gosh, probably like a decade or more. We've been recording these videos. And so I've always been a Dragon Quest fan, like guilty as charged. And I was playing the imports all the way on the Super Famicom. So when Square jumped ship to PlayStation, I knew Enix was going to follow. Like, there was no way, there was no world in which that was not going to happen. And so I made sure that I had an import PlayStation because I knew that Dragon Quest would eventually be going to the PlayStation. And when that was finally announced and it actually happened, I had imported that like day and date, right? It took a while though. That one I think took like 3 weeks or a month to get here before I could actually experience it. And when I did experience it, because it was like 2000, I think it was when it came out. Well, yeah, 25th, obviously. It wasn't as jarring as when the North American version got released. Sure, it's still absolutely, it has a very distinct look to it, but I was just so happy, guys, because there was quite a number of years between Dragon Quest VI and Dragon Quest VII that I was just so thrilled to see Dragon Quest VII just exist. I was absolutely thrilled by that. And what you're seeing, all of this footage, you know, like all this early footage is I just wanted to give you guys something to look at while I'm chatting away here. And yeah, I loved this concept that you were like a fisherman's son. You're not like some uber powerful, like, you know, legendary hero type of thing. And it was so cool how you basically had this tiny little island that you could explore, and that was it. And I was blown away that this was the game, you know? Like, I went around and I was like, where the hell are the enemies? Like, what is going on here? And you would search, and you're going all over the place, and you're talking to your friends and stuff, and then eventually you find like a fragment. And then you take these fragments and you put them on these altars, and you eventually basically warp to another time where this particular island existed. And you go through and you'll have your dungeons, and yes, then you will fight your monsters and all that stuff. But it was just so absolutely unique that I never really played anything quite like that before. And then when you finish that, you can bring the island into your time, and then slowly but surely you're like rebuilding the world. And I just thought that was so unbelievably awesome, especially for its time. And forget about its time, it was just super cool. It was super cool to experience something like that. And yes, I did find that it was dragging on, the fact that you would, you know, like I said before, like that you would go through a dungeon or an area or something like that in its own time period, and then you would pull it back into your world where you would experience it all over again. I did, by the end of the game, I was sort of like, okay, and I think my memory card has like 220 hours or something like that on the game because of that. But it was still a really good adventure. It is one that I tell people that it's a deep game. Like, you have to go like 20 hours before you unlock the Abbey in order to, like, you know, change your classes and stuff. But there's a lot of good stuff in here, man. Like, if I'm not mistaken, 7 introduced the Druid class. Like, there was a lot of really cool stuff that was introduced in 7. And the post game of 7, while not as deep as some of the later games, especially 11, I still can't get over what they did. They basically continued the story in the post game. But you can go and you can actually fight God. That was the really cool thing with the post game. And that one, you can eventually even have God like stay in your village and stuff. It was so ridiculous. But overall, at that point in time, you have to remember that, like, I had no idea that Dragon Quest was ever going to come back to North America. So, like, I had imported these games all the way from the Super Famicom. Well, hell, I was playing the Japanese one on the NES, but all the SNES ones I imported. So for me, it was just like, okay, well, I guess, you know, I'm just going to keep going. And so for me, it was a really different experience than most people. And I'm definitely one of the guys that, like, you know, contributed to it becoming the top selling PlayStation game in Japan, which a lot of people just don't realize, because they look at what you're seeing and they're just like, it's okay. Like, But for me, it was absolutely awesome, because there was years with no Dragon Quest. Now suddenly, not only did I have a Dragon Quest, but I had a Dragon Quest that I could sink in like 200 hours into. And yeah, like I said, I'm not oblivious to the fact that there was repetition in it, and by the end of the game, I was absolutely starting to feel that, where I was like, okay, don't make me do this area again. And then they made me do the area again. But again, I didn't mind it, because it was just so good to see Dragon Quest back, and it was absolutely amazing. Where Dragon Quest VII lands on my, like, global list, I'm not sure, because the repetition does ding it. I mean, I played it again on the was it a 3DS or the DS? 3DS. I played it again on the 3DS. and I played in both Japanese and in English, and now there's rumors saying that they're going to remake it again. I'm not entirely sure why they would select that one in particular to remake, only because like Dragon Quest IX like has been gone for a long time, and that one's really due for a remake. So we'll see what happens. So anyways, guys, I just wanted to ramble a little bit about Dragon Quest VII, you know, hitting 25 years old. I cannot believe that. What about you? What are some of the things that you liked, disliked? I didn't talk about the story. I didn't talk about any of that. It was more my time. Like, you really had to have been there. And for me, I was just, this game will always hold a special place in my heart because it came out at a time when Dragon Quest games were rare, man. They weren't coming out like all the time. And especially around that time with the PlayStation, we didn't know what was going to happen to Dragon Quest, and it just turned into this incredible adventure. And if you haven't played any of the Dragon Quest games, I do recommend starting with one of the other ones first, only because it's not as deep of an experience and you can finish it a little bit quicker and so on and so forth. But Dragon Quest VII is definitely one to check out. So guys, let me know what you think of Dragon Quest VII. I would love to hear your thoughts.